and ruthless conspiracy.
Aliens are extra-dimensional beings.
It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe.
Welcome to Dark Discoveries.
Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the case may be, whenever this episode finds you, wherever you are. I'm your host, Jacob Kimbrough, and this is Dark Discoveries. Welcome if you're a new listener, and if you are returning, my apologies for the rather Darth Vader-y first episode. Our last episode was a little plagued by some internet connection issues between me and my interviewee, but I still would like to send him a great thank you for his appearance on my podcast, and I would like to say that he is a hero of mine for his anti-war stance, his continued belief in non-interventionism and looking at America's foreign policy from the outside, because I believe it is very important that we understand that these foreign entanglements really just hurt and hamper our ability to engage with the world at a diplomatic level. I can't wait to talk with Mr. Kinzer again. And if you haven't listened to the last episode, please go back and listen to it. It's a fantastic episode. I am still getting used to all the ins and outs of podcasting, and I'll continue to improve over time. Any feedback can be sent in through all my social media. Facebook at Dark Discoveries, YouTube at Dark Discoveries Pod, on Twitter at Dark Discoverer. Yeah, I know that's kind of corny, but every relatable handle has been taken, so oh well, you can't win them all. I will eventually put up an Instagram and all the other clusters of social media monotony, but for now, I'm only a one-man band, and content is king, so here we are. So I hope this episode finds you well and happy, and if it does, good luck holding on to that cheery disposition as we delve deep into another dark discovery. Today, our proverbial flashlight shines on the story of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, aka Pendrijo Matador, Killer Little Pedro, Killer Petey, Killer Petey, don't worry, this is the abridged list of nicknames, and my personal favorite, the Brazilian Dexter. Now that last nickname is given to him because he is the loose basis for the fictional serial killer from Jeff Lindsay's book series and subsequent show about Dexter Morgan. If you haven't seen the show or read the books, I highly recommend it. Both are very good. The first book and the first season of the show, they go pretty hand in hand. Past that, they both go off on their own storylines, but the story of Dexter Morgan is one tied to this dark discovery. And if you've seen the ending of the show ×2, don't spoil it for your neighbor. Let them suffer on their own. Now, a preemptive apology for totally butchering the names and places herein, pun intended. Pedro Rodrigues Filho is known for his purported vigilante kills. Now, Filho claims to have killed well over 100 people, including murderers, drug dealers, and rapists. He's described by one analyst as the, quote, perfect psychopath, unquote, someone with no remorse and no compassion for others. Rodrigues Filho went after other criminals and those who had wronged him, as we will see coming up. So I guess before we go too deep, we need to start at the beginning. Pedro Rodrigues Filho was the son of Pedro Rodrigues. Filho in Portuguese is junior, it's the equivalent to junior. Pedro Rodrigues Jr. was the son of Pedro Rodrigues, and considering Papa Pedro plays a big role in the story, we'll use, Killer Petey. I'll refer to the father as Senior, or maybe even Papa Pedro, because I like the sound of that. And then our spotlight son will either be Killer Petey or Filho, either way. Alright, so Pedro Rodrigues Filho was born on October 29th of 1954 in Santa Rita do Sapucaí. Now that I totally butchered that. In Santa Rita do Sapucaí, Brazil. He was thrust into a violent beginning from the womb. And after an argument between his parents, his father kicked Killer Petey's mother in the stomach while she was pregnant with him, and it resulted in him having a bruised skull and a skull depression or dent at his hairline. Killer Petey had a very low level of education. He never went to school. and he fell precociously into gangs. He wouldn't learn to read or write until much later in life, after he was incarcerated, actually. Now, he claimed he felt the urge to kill for the first time at age 13, when in a fight with an older cousin over who would ride which horse. Now, he pushed his young cousin into a sugar cane press, almost killing him, and had considered leaving him there to die before electing to save him. Now, the cousin did lose the arm, and for those who may not be familiar, a sugarcane press, it works by crushing the sugarcane stalks between two rollers. You just feed the sugarcane into the rollers, which then squeezes out the juice. So yeah, that demonstration should leave little to the imagination of what it would do to a human arm. Now, it wouldn't be long until the urge returned, and this time he would follow through. So when Petey was 14 years old, his father was working as a security guard at a local school when he was accused of stealing food and was subsequently fired. Now, this hindered him greatly from attaining any further employment. Petey would later say that this enraged his father and brought more hell upon him and his family. And Killer Petey was sent into a rage because all this extra trouble at home between his father and himself, and his father and his mother, and his father and I believe he had 13 siblings. And it turned his father into even more of an abusive person, which, considering all that has gone on, is that's kind of hard to believe. He kicked his pregnant wife in the stomach, so this guy's not a good guy. Killer Petey's father perceived all of this to be an injustice to him, and he took it out on his family. So Killer Petey set out in reaction to all this, and he shot the town's deputy mayor in front of City Hall with his grandfather's shotgun. And from there, he would go to kill the security guard suspected to be the actual thief. So his kill count is at least at 2, and he's still just 14 years old. After he killed that security guard, the police were obviously after him, and he fled to Mogi das Cruzes in Greater Sao Paulo, where his godparents lived. He met the widow of a drug lord, nicknamed Botina, and they moved in together. He took over the widow's dead husband's tasks and was soon forced to eliminate some rivals, killing 3 former accomplices. He lived with Botina until she was executed by the police, and during this execution, he escaped, but he did not stop selling drugs and doing other cartel-related activities. He rallied a few soldiers together and then set up his own business. And mind you, he says he was about 16 years old at this time. And at this time, he met Maria Aparecida Olympia, with whom he would become engaged. And she soon would become pregnant with his child when tragedy would strike yet again for Pedro Rodrigues Filho. He returned home to find his pregnant and soon-to-be wife murdered by a gunshot. He once again found himself enraged, and he would seek revenge. Later, he would have her name tattooed on his arm, and next to the name written, quote, "I am capable of killing for love," unquote. Now we're going to find out as we go forward, he's capable of killing for other reasons than just love. He killed and tortured several people trying to discover those responsible for the murder of his love and unborn child. He was unsuccessful until the mastermind, an old rival, was ratted out by an ex-wife. Now, Killer Petey and 4 friends visited him during a wedding, and they left a trail of at least 7 dead and 16 wounded. Now, this is where he kind of, he goes off a little bit from his purported only vigilantism. Sources claimed that he killed or wounded innocent and guilty alike, and contrary to his own purported narrative, did not care or have any discretion at all about who he was hurting and killing. Months after this massacre, he discovered that the boyfriend of his favorite cousin had impregnated her but refused to marry her and fatally shot him in revenge. I want to keep it in everyone's mind that this is all happening up to this point before he's 17 years old. Not long after killing his favorite cousin's baby daddy, he found out that his father was in prison for murdering and dismembering his mother with a machete. Now remember, he had to flee from home when he took revenge on the perceived injustice for his father, when the town's deputy mayor and the security guard, those 2 murders happened because he supposedly believed that his father was innocent. So he didn't know that this had happened until word had got back to him that his father was in prison and he was in there for murdering and dismembering his mother with a machete. And Filho visited his father in prison and killed him by stabbing his father 22 times. Filho said the reason he stabbed his father 22 times was because his father cut his mother into 21 pieces. So he had to one-up him. And after that murder, not only did he stab him, he carved his heart out and took a bite and left the rest of his father's heart on his bloodied remains. Now, this all happened before he was even 18 years old. He hadn't even turned 18 years old yet, and he has participated in, at the very least, 11 murders that we know of, with him being the sole contributor of it at the very least 4. He claims that he had committed far more than that, but sources say he was one to embellish a story to make himself out to be something greater, and we'll see why coming up. Filho continued to kill many criminals that he deemed to meet his moral code, and after staying miles ahead of the police for years, he was finally arrested on May 24th of 1973. This was 5 months short of his 19th birthday. When arrested, his captors didn't realize the extent to which Killer Petey's crimes had gone. They put him in a squad car with 3 fellow delinquents, one of which was a confirmed rapist. Petey had found out this man was accused of rape, and by the time the police had stopped the squad car, they found him killed on the spot. During his incarceration, he continued to kill people in prison, claiming the lives of at least 47 inmates. He killed inmates because of his past as a killer of criminals, which, as I'm sure you can guess, caused a majority of the prison population to hate him. In one attack by other inmates, Petey was ambushed, but he killed at least 3 of his attackers and injured another 2. Other inmates were chosen randomly. One of his victims, a cellmate and career criminal, was killed simply because he snored too much, and Petey also said because of the crimes that he had committed in the past. Some of his victims were killed because, according to him, the thrill of killing another criminal was wonderful and satisfying. Petey was almost released from prison in 2003, but the release request was turned down because of his murders that had occurred inside prison. Now, at the time of his first incarceration, the maximum sentence was 30 years, but because he had committed other crimes, they were able to extend his prison stay. He was officially released on April 24th, 2007, however, but then subsequently arrested again at his house, September 15th, 2011, and convicted of riot and false imprisonment. I've not been able to find a whole lot what happened in those 4 years in between. Pedro Rodrigues Filho kind of went silent for that time, and supposedly didn't commit any crime except for this riot and false imprisonment. Couldn't find out specifics on that either. He did admit that his only motivation to be released was the fact that he had a girlfriend outside of prison. I tried to find out, was she the one that was false in prison? Couldn't find it. It's hard to find a lot of these facts coming out of Brazil. He was later sentenced to 128 years in prison for these charges, due to Brazil's repealing of the decree that declares that diagnosed psychopaths can be held indefinitely, and the fact that Brazil's maximum prison sentence is still 30 years. Petey was released in 2018. He vowed after his release that he would never commit any crime again, and he became a housekeeper and vowed his killing days were done. He also started a YouTube channel, which this blew my mind. The YouTube channel, if you can go find it, good luck understanding half of what's said, but you can go find it and read some subtitles. He talks about his experiences. The YouTube channel had over 250,000 subscribers last I checked. And then I found out that March 5th of this year, he died. He was gunned down in the streets of Mogi das Cruzes in Brazil. This was his old stomping grounds, which is kind of poetic in a sick way. We find out that after all this time, he had survived by being brutal and doing these killings. And in the end, when he finally calmed down and his killing days were behind him, that's when he finally gets taken out by, it's believed to be a rival gang leaders that took him out. We don't really know yet to this point. Part of the reason that I chose this topic for this episode, I could have gone with, Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer or David Berkowitz, any of the high-profile serial killers for my first serial killer episode. But I had not heard of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, and for me, this was a discovery. Even if he's a purported vigilanteist, he's still a serial killer. And I believe that, I'm not a psychologist, I don't claim to be, but I believe that the reason he used this excuse of being a killer of killers, or a killer of the maladjusted and malcontents and the bad and the terrible, is because it was the best way for him to be perceived in a positive light. And at times during the research of this episode, which I distilled a whole lot of research down into this, however long this episode is, I came to find out that he was really he was just a psychopath. Pure and simple. He really just enjoyed killing, and he did whatever he had to do. He himself admitted that his life in prison via the guards was a lot easier because they viewed him as an ally against all these other criminals. And it may have made his life a lot harder amongst the criminals. He was a hardened criminal himself, and was also viewed as a hero among some. Not a whole lot, but among some. And among the guards, he was viewed very, very favorably, and was given a lot of leeway because of it. He was released on good behavior. Even though he'd committed 47 murders in prison, he was only given an extra 4-year sentence. Going forward, I'll definitely deep dive into some dark discoveries on more mainstream serial killers that I have a whole lot more information about. It was one of the struggles of this episode, was trying to find as many pertinent details as I could. I found only his account in most situations, so we have to take a lot of what he said with a grain of salt. Now, he was definitely convicted for 71 murders all told, so he was also found guilty of those. So his kill count is at least 71. He purported it's way over 100. He gave the information on some of the bodies over the 71st, and none of those bodies were ever found. Now, some of them did match up with missing persons reports, but apparently in Brazil, missing people are a very large problem due to sexual trafficking and other things. One way he differs from his counterparts, psychopaths that is he did not go looking for women or children. He did stick to usually men around his own age or criminal men. He says he never killed a child and he never killed a woman. He only killed men who were killers, rapists, and things of that nature. So take that for what you will. All the other things I could find out about Pedro Rodrigues Filho were more often than not disputed, and most times were just conjecture. So we'll leave those things to the ether, and we'll stop our story right there on Pedro Rodrigues Filho, aka the Brazilian Dexter. I thank you so very much for sticking around for this episode. It's a bit of a short episode, but that'll give you time to go back and listen to the previous episodes if you haven't listened to them already. And we may put out an extra episode this week due to the short nature of this episode. If that is the case, I will let everyone know via any subscription they have on any of the social media followings or the podcast followings. I'll let you all know if there's an episode coming out. If not, then our next episode will release no later than next Wednesday. Now, it's going to be a special episode, and I hope you all tune in. If you want to be reminded when that episode comes in, go ahead and subscribe, rate, review. Those last two things are for me more than for you, but if you subscribe, you'll get the podcast as soon as it comes to you. You'll get a notification. You can follow us on Twitter, Dark Discoverer. Yeah, I know. You can follow us at YouTube at Dark Discoveries Pod. You can search for Dark Discoveries on Facebook. You can find us on any podcast platform where podcasts are curated. Just search Dark Discoveries or my name, Jacob Kimbrough, and you'll find us. So once again, thank you for staying around, listening to this Dark Discovery. I look forward to bringing you the next episode. Bye-bye for now.